Good evening and welcome to the Think Tank. I'm Rob Harris, your host. Tonight's topic, ISIS, and the growing threat that it poses to the Middle East and to the globe at large. We will be examining the issue from several different perspectives so that we can better understand the many intricate parts that make up this conflict. Then, we will discuss what moves we, as individuals and as a nation, can take moving forward. To help me do this, I'll be joined by a panel of 3 Gonzaga University professors. They will each give unique insights that will give us a better picture of the challenge facing us. We have Dr. Shannon Dunn from Religious Studies, Dr. Michael Trelevin from Political Science, and Dr. Andrew Goldman from History. As always, we want you to be a part of the discussion as well. Tweet your questions and reactions to @GUTV-ZAGS or post them on our Facebook page, and we may share them on air. Jess Clement is in the tweet suite, and she's going to be coordinating our social media for the night. She's also going to give us a brief introduction to the geography of ISIS. Jess?
Thanks, Rob. Geography is a really important part of any conflict, but in this battle for territory, it's especially important to keep in mind and to be educated about what's happening and where what is happening. So, taking a look at this map that we got from New York Times, we can see here that Iraq, first of all, is located southeast of Syria, and this is where it all began. ISIS was originally a faction group of Al-Qaeda, and they were based in Iraq. Now, in February of 2014, they actually split off based on ideological differences to create their own movement. So, looking at this map, we can see that ISIS is taking control in all of the spots that have this red dot here. So you can see they've gained a lot of control in Syria, both in Syria and in Iraq. 2 places that are really important to keep in mind. One, Mosul, the first place that they were able to overtake, is the second largest city in Iraq and is now under ISIS control. The second thing that I think is really important to keep in mind is the proximity of the ISIS-controlled areas here in this Fallujah area to Baghdad. Now, I'm not sure if you can see on this map, and we'll just clear it up here a little bit, but there is continued fighting splaying in almost every direction coming from Baghdad, which is an area of concern for analysts looking at this problem. Throughout the show, we want you to tweet at us at GUTV-ZAGS or contact us on Facebook at facebook.com/GUTV-ZAGS with any comments or questions you might have that you'd like to be answered throughout the show. Rob?
Thanks, Jess. So, welcome to our panel. Let's dive into the historical aspect of ISIS. How far back do we have to look to find this rift between Sunnis and Shias?
Well,
Dr. Goldman.
Really quite far back. I suppose that would be more a question of religious studies then.
Yeah. So basically, after the Prophet Muhammad died, there was a debate among his closest followers about who would be the rightful guide, basically. Since Muhammad didn't appoint a successor before he died, this was a huge question. And so basically there was a political debate that went on for many years. After the fourth successor, Ali, which was the Prophet's son-in-law, became the sort of guide of the community. But not everybody agreed with Ali for some complicated reasons, and eventually he was assassinated by kind of an outsider group called the Kharijites. And after that, at that point, we could say that there was sort of a Sunni-Shia divide, and the rest is history in a lot of ways, but it goes back to this question over rightful leadership. Should it be the Prophet's family, or should it be his close friends? And in a lot of ways, the current Sunni-Shia conflict doesn't really allow us to see the early nature of that debate.
Right.
It kind of obscures it.
Can you explain how ISIS fits into the Sunni-Shia mold?
Well, basically, my understanding is, and I'm not much of a political scientist, is that it has to do with the fact that Iraq's Sunnis are a minority, and there was a lot of resentment after the U.S. invasion of Iraq and the Shia leadership that was empowered upon the U.S. leaving Iraq. And so Sunnis have kind of, they were kind of discontented with the Shia leadership. And so it's a very sectarian, it goes back to questions of identity,
Right.
More than sort of like, no, Ali was the right leader versus, you know, Abu Bakr.
So speaking on this identity, Dr. Goldman, how does the Sunni-Shia conflict today parallel some of the ones that have happened in the past?
Well, if we're talking about leadership questions, you know, this is the whole question, I guess, we could address of the caliphate, and this goes back to who is the rightful caliph, and the caliph is the successor of Muhammad, and the caliphate has jumped around all across the Middle East over the centuries. It's the Abbasid rulers who were in Baghdad were the caliphate for a long time. There have been multiple caliphates of multiple people trying to proclaim the leadership. The Mongols came in and wiped out Baghdad, just flattened the place, and then it went to Egypt, and afterwards the Ottoman sultans were the most recent. Until in 1924, the caliphate was abolished, officially abolished, and there hasn't been one since. So what's been interesting is they're picking up this title, which has been vacant now for 90 years, really. And we talk about Shiites and Sunnis fighting, but you know, there's a question of sort of claiming this historical leadership, for which I think most Muslims are pretty much in the camp of this is not the caliph.
Right. Has the battle for the caliph always been this bloody?
No, I don't. Well, yes and no. It's too long a history to make a big generalization about it. I don't think it's been this. Well, modern weapons are terribly vicious, so that's part of the problem.
If they had modern weapons in the past, do you think that would have changed things?
Quite possible.
So Jess mentioned in the previous segment the connection between Al-Qaeda and ISIS. Can any of you guys clarify that for our viewers?
Well, as I understand it, there was a sort of Al-Qaeda is the sort of predecessor to this, not in terms of personality necessarily, but in terms of tactics. ISIS comes in as a much more aggressive enterprise, aiming to grab territories and suppress real or potential opposition.
Do you think each are motivated by the same factors?
No, I don't think so. I think ISIS has this split in Iraq between with that Dr. Dunn just spoke of, and the breakdown of Syria. The two countries here have become failed states, Iraq and Syria, and an enormous vacuum has emerged. So ISIS aims apparently to take and hold territory, whereas I don't think Al-Qaeda ever took that approach.
You brought up the interesting point of the failed states, and that brings me to the point of, we're calling the show ISIS. President Obama would call it ISIL. Can you describe the difference between the two, and what would you call it? And I would open that up to the panel.
You know, that's, I don't know. I mean, and I'm not sure where the significance of the difference would be. The issue with ISIS is what it does, not so much its label, as I understand it.
Yeah, and when we talk about Sunni and Shiites, you know, the better historical perspective to look on this is the Wahhabis of Saudi Arabia, and this is actually an extension of Wahhabism, which is a far more conservative branch. There are far fewer Wahhabis, but they're firmly rooted in Saudi Arabia, and the ideas behind this, and perhaps Dr. Dunn can speak to this, is what is powering ISIL forward rather than the usual Sunni-Shiite debate that has been so devastating to Iraq.
Right. There's an umbrella term that we like to use in Islamic studies called Islamism. And it refers to a particular political version of Islam. So Al-Qaeda could fall under the umbrella of Islamism. Wahhabism could fall under the umbrella. ISIL, ISIS, Islamic State could fall under the umbrella. And it's basically, they're all committed to making Islam a public religion, in the sense of having a state, having an established state, having some form of public Sharia or Islamic law. And Indeed, the Wahhabis have been very influential. It's an 18th century movement, but in the Wahhabis are known for their intolerance of other traditions. They're Saudi Arabian originally. They're also known for their destruction of idols in other parts of the world, not only in Saudi Arabia, but destructions of like the Buddha. And destruction of anything they see as being associated with God. So they're very Puritan in a way. That would be kind of the analog. They don't ideologically. They're very insistent that God is the only one worth worshiping, and so therefore also very. I mean, it's just a very interesting. Interesting.
Okay, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to shift the conversation towards religion. Just how Islamic is the Islamic State? We're going to discuss this and more, so stick around. You're watching The Think Tank on GUTV. 90 seconds, so yeah, not too long. But you're doing.
Hey Phil, we miss you here at GUTV. Come back soon.
Phil, I miss my butterscotch, but more importantly, I miss you, buddy. Prayers and thoughts are with you. Please hurry back soon.
Hi, Phil. Things are definitely not the same without you here. We hope you're feeling better.
Hey, Phil. We're missing you here around the studio. Get well soon.
Phil, I miss your sense of humor around here, man. We're all thinking of you, and we hope you get better soon.
Wishing you a speedy recovery, Phil. We'll see you back here soon.
Hey, Phil, the energy's just not the same without you here, man. We're all wishing you a speedy recovery, and we hope to see you soon.
Hey Phil, we miss you here. I really hope you feel better, and my prayers are with you, buddy.
Hey Phil, this place is empty without you. We need you back. Our thoughts and prayers are with you and your family. Get well soon.
Phil, GUTV needs your help. Come back soon.
Hey Phil, it's Jess. I'm Jess. I've almost been to jail like 3 times without you here. I miss your legal advice, I miss our conversations, and I look forward to having them once more. So, you know, scoot on over here as soon as possible. That'd be great. Okay, ciao.
Phil Taylor, we miss you over here, man. GUTV is just not the same without you. I haven't had GUTV without Phil, and so far I don't like it. It's not rolling with me. I miss our little awkward conversations you always have in this hallway, just back and forths. Dude, thoughts and prayers are with you. Miss you so much, and I'm wishing you the best right now.
Welcome back to The Think Tank. We're discussing the ISIS conflict in Iraq and Syria. Remember, you can join the discussion by tweeting your questions and responses to @GUTVZags or posting them on their Facebook page. Speaking of Twitter, we have a Twitter question that feeds great into our next conversation, which is about the religion of ISIS. If we can get that pulled up. So Marissa Morrison brings up the question, she's in media. Do you think the media should work harder to educate on the separation between the Muslim religion and ISIS, the extremists?
Well, it's a complicated question. And I think a lot of Muslims, I would say the majority of Muslims, are trying to distance themselves from ISIS or ISIL just because of its extremism and the violence associated with Islam or with the Islamic State. I think that the media, you know, in a way probably has some responsibility to educate Americans about Islam in a better way than it has historically, especially after 9/11. I mean, that's one of the reasons I got into teaching Islam, is I think that generally people are really helped by information and by accurate information. So, you know, giving people information so that they can make decisions about how Islamic ISIS is or not is probably a great thing. It's the purpose of a college education.
So now that you are a professor and you're on the media, give us the perspective that we don't have. How is ISIS misrepresenting Islam as a religion?
Okay, well, since I'm not Muslim, I can't make that theological claim, right? But I have a letter with me written by 126, or signed by 126 Muslims from around the world, Muslim leaders, scholars, professors, imams, and this kind of thing. And they basically take ISIS to task for what they perceive to be its violation of Islamic just war theory, which is fascinating. They basically say that al-Baghdadi, who is the self-proclaimed caliph, actually has no authority to do what he's doing, that he's not allowed to kill innocent civilians as he's doing. This goes against the legal traditions of Islam, and it also goes against verses in the Hadith and the Quran in which the legal traditions are built. So that would be an example of Muslims speaking out and showing that the extremism of this group is, in a lot of ways, a caricature of, a violation, right? But it's a caricature of ideas about jihad, ideas about the purposes of going to war, the justice of war.
So can you give us an idea of the places in the Quran or other Islamic doctrine that ISIS is either misunderstanding or misconstruing in their justification?
I'm pretty sure they're looking at the Quran, chapter 9. There are some verses, I'm not a Quranic scholar, so I can't recite them off the top of my head, but chapter 9 is typically the place where you find exhortations to Muhammad to fight unbelievers. There are several of these kinds of chapters. And so what the Muslim scholars are saying against al-Baghdadi is that he's taking these out of context. He is reading them not looking at the exegetical traditions of the Quran. He's taking them out of the context of their original, of course, people had to fight the unbelievers in order to survive in the early Muslim context. So to do that, they're saying basically it is a violation of Islamic law, of Islamic ethics.
Right. We've seen over the past few decades a number of groups like ISIS pop up, and I think that has led to the misunderstanding that has taken grasp of the media, of culture itself. Why do you think that these groups are so prevalent today, or why are we focusing them?
I don't think
today?
we've seen anybody like ICE. I think they stand out as being a real exception, which is one of the reasons why there's so much alarm. They're completely unpredictable, or at least they're without rules, and so I think that they do stand out very much from what we have seen in recent years.
I agree. I think that there's been a considerable amount of violence since the Second World War in this region of the world, inflicted on this region of the world by outside forces and generated inside the region by internal forces and conflicts. But this is quite different. It doesn't resemble some of the things that have gone on, the recent exchange between Israel and Hamas and Palestine. Those are really much more political and it's terrible to say it because the violence isn't good at all, but it's a relatively politicized violence where somebody's trying to get negotiating advantage. But ISIS is much more radical.
Yeah, and in fact, in Turkey, for example, in the 1980s, there was a large problem with Kurdish revolts going on, especially in southeastern Turkey, and that's spilled over the border. But it was always a nationalistic issue or an identity issue, and this is a strongly religious issue that seems to be ignoring those kind of previous issues.
We have a question from Steven Sandberg on our Facebook page that I think is very prevalent to this issue. He asked, what is ISIS doing to appeal to troubled young people, and what could be done to stop this influence? I think this plays to religion, possibly. Why do you think that young people in these areas are so drawn to this group?
They had something funny on the radio the other day where they call some of these people who are young people who are interested in this jihadists, because they are very interested in it, but they sort of sit at their computers and they watch and they read and they play games, but they don't necessarily act. But larger numbers of them are, and that's been something new.
And we see them using social media in a way that other groups haven't.
Are we talking there, Andy, about people, say, in the West, in America, Britain, Canada, and so on, who are online and have maybe lived a long time, and born and raised in these countries, but still become attracted to and then seek to join ISIS, move there? There's one crowd of folks, but a second crowd of folks who join ISIS are young men and women indigenous to the region, not living in the West. And I wonder if those are become two distinct groups in ISIS, or really the foreigners, the folks from the West, are really a minor part of the ISIS movement. I don't know, but it strikes me that the indigenous crowd are probably the bread and butter of the movement.
Yeah, well, and this is why I think people are so alarmed politically right now, because the numbers are much larger than anyone had suspected. And this is, of course, what got our vice president into so much trouble over the last couple of days, speaking out about this. Large numbers of Turks, for example, have crossed the border, and young men. The New York Times recently had interviewed several who spoke out about poor conditions as they were growing up, lack of jobs, opportunities, this sort of disaffected people who find that this is an opportunity to go out and be part of something.
Right. And one of the things that's important in Islamic teachings is the idea of social justice. So you can imagine that in some contexts where people have, maybe they're watching the conflict between Israel and Palestine unfold over the summer, and they're seeing the fact that innocent Palestinian children are being killed. And they feel an emotional tug that it's not a national tug, it's a Muslim identity tug, right? Or they see injustice, so they want to do something about it, right? But how do they get involved? I think, I don't know, I don't want to call them masterminds, but I think that people who are recruiters for organizations like this understand the appeal of the social justice cause, right? And so, as I try and talk when we're talking about war, in my classes, we talk about the kinds of things that you would fight for, right? Well, not everyone's like, I'm going to go fight for a tyrant. I'm going to go fight for a murderer. No, there's something else going on there.
So if, as you mentioned, a lot of Muslim leaders are starting to come out against ISIS, do you think that will disenfranchise these young people from their own religion? Or will they try and revolt from within their own religion?
Well, it sounds like they might be disconnected from their communities anyway if they're kind of by themselves. And this is kind of something that we're, I guess, reading about now. And I was actually reading a really interesting article about the importance of local mosque leaders, whether imams or other community leaders in the Muslim, various cities, even in the United States, including people, instead of excluding them, that if they think that they may be involved or interested in militancy, to really try and bring them in instead of push them out, because the speculation is that because of they feel an outsider of their own communities, they're more likely to join one of these international
Would you say that the
organizations.
Majority, I hate to paint with a broad brush, but would you say the majority of young people feel a stronger identity to Islam at large rather than their own communities, like their own individual mosque?
It depends. I mean, there's immigration. Like in this country, that's what the country I know the most about in terms of Islam. There are different immigrant communities, and of course, there are indigenous Muslim communities in the United States as well. It depends on how well integrated they are. How well integrated are they? I mean, the case of the Boston Marathon bomber, for example, that raised questions about, how well was this person integrated into his community? So I think there are a number of non-religious factors that must be taken into account.
Yes, psychological ones. I think in Syria and Iraq, there's been so much breakdown of organized society, communities, so much violence. So how does a person respond? There might be persons who are simply resigned to this, persons very bitter, persons who seek to flee and emigrate somewhere else, or persons who no longer feel the bonds and the boundaries of their place and community, but feel very affronted by what's happened to Islam, at least in their judgment. And this is a formula for people to be attracted to the person who seems to have the answer. We'll fight back if we join ISIS. We'll fight back, and so now I think that these persons become dislocated. They're no longer embedded in their family structure, in their clan structure, perhaps. Now, again, that's painting with the broad brush.
Right. I wonder if you could give us some insight into commonalities between Christianity and Islam that might help some of our viewers to better connect with the issue, who might see them as other at this point.
The fighters as other or Muslims as other?
I'm sorry, say it again.
So the people who are joining the Islamic State or Muslims in
as other.
general?
I'm saying I think a lot of people might misunderstand how similar the two religions are.
Okay, well, there are important similarities and important differences, but I would say, especially when we're thinking about a place like Gonzaga, social justice is an important common commitment of both Islam and Christianity, or especially within certain parts of Christianity. The sense that you have to look out for your neighbor, in the case of the Prophet Muhammad, the outcast, the orphan, the person who is socially powerless. So a lot of the verses of the Quran, they're very beautiful. They deal with the necessity of reaching out and doing justice, regardless of your religion or your religious identity. So I think that those kinds of things are a great way, and not that everybody should just go and pick up a Quran, but there are texts out there that can help people kind of navigate, the Quran is an interesting document. Social justice is an important part of the Islamic tradition. We need to take seriously, the social justice claims of a lot of Muslims. And we need to recognize that those are distinct, though, from the radical military solutions, right, that groups like the Islamic State come up with.
Right. We're going to take another quick break, and when we come back, we'll discuss the politics behind ISIS, both here in the United States and around the world. We'll be right back.
Those longboarders are really starting to get on my nerves.
Bikers and scooters, too. They act like they own the sidewalk.
Yeah, earlier I was walking around and I saw a skateboarder. He was coming at me real hot and my friend was like, whoa. Then he just ran right into me. Then I looked at him and he said, my friend told him to share the concrete. So then I was like, yeah, share the concrete, bro.
Yeah, people with wheels need to share.
I want to be a well-respected actor.
I want to be a therapist.
I want to be a supermodel.
I want to be a history teacher.
I want to climb mountains in New Zealand.
I want to change the world through education of young minds.
I want to be an artist I don't know, but I just want to be an artist.
I want to be a marine biologist.
I want to be a doctor and save lives.
Welcome back to our think tank on ISIS. Remember, please be sending in your comments and your reflections and your questions to our @GUTV Zags Twitter handle or on our Facebook page. We're going to talk about politics, and I'd like to open up the panel with the broad question of two doctrines of democracy that I see as fundamental: religious tolerance and inalienable human rights. When we see states around the world that are not honoring inalienable human rights based on religious doctrine, how do you think we should handle that from the United States' perspective?
Well, the USA isn't in a position to dictate to every country in the world, so it has to make very careful decisions about where to draw lines and where to be active And in some ways, no country on the planet is perfect in regards to these things. So if the European Union, for example, forbids capital punishment, the USA still has capital punishment. These two sets of democracies still have to do business with one another and should do business with one another. So a pure answer to the question, I think, is a bad answer to the question.
Fair enough. We're going to go to a Twitter question that we have received in. I was told it's going to be in the prompter. There we go. At GUTV Zags, what is your opinion about Turkey's hesitation with going into Syria after Turkey claimed it would support the U.S. against ISIS? From Luke Petrin. I'm going to offer this one to Dr. Goldman.
Yes, well, as somebody who's worked and lived in Turkey for over 20 years, I have a great fondness for the country. I took GU students with me there in 2012. And I would say our relationship with Turkey, particularly over the last 15 or 20 years, has been very complicated. I think we need to look at it from the point of view of the Turks, who are members of NATO and have been since the early 1950s. And yet, they also live in close proximity with Syria and a lot of these other countries, and they have to deal with the immediate fallout. In the most recent set of conflicts, Turkey actually refused to allow Americans to fly jets out of the Incirlik Air Base, which is located in southeastern Turkey. They actually voted in Parliament not to allow this. So there has been some hesitation. Part of it was because in the 1990s, after the first Gulf War, the United States promised Turkey a great deal of economic aid and so forth, a lot of which was never forthcoming. They'd been burned, at least this is how many of the Turks feel. Mm-hmm. So they're doubly cautious about getting involved in this. Now, Turkey also has the largest army in the Middle East right now, and should Turkey wish to go in, they're well equipped, they have the forces, they certainly could do a lot of damage. And it's really an open question. You know, the demand right now is that they deal with Assad, who has been their neighbor for a long time. Syria has been very problematic, and they would like to end what has been now a 3-year civil war, which has been very devastating for them. Hundreds of thousands of refugees are now in southern Turkey. So they're being cautious, and I would hate to guess which way they're going to move. But they will, I think, eventually enter in.
Do you think it's fair for President of Turkey to demand United States intervention in Syria?
I don't think he's demanded U.S. intervention as much as U.S. support, for example, for those people who are trying to overthrow Assad. It's a difference in opinion. The opinion of the United States is let's get rid of ISIL and then deal with Assad. The opinion of Turkey is, let's deal with Assad, and then we can deal with ISIL. And so what we have here is really two different ways of looking at this problem, which is an immensely complex one.
We were talking about your trip to Turkey. You've done one in the past, and you're going to do one again. Do you feel any sort of pause in that trip, given the current situation in Turkey, and specifically near Turkey?
Yeah. Well, when we go to Turkey, we of course won't be anywhere near these places. As to what the political situation will be, the Turks, as they showed last year in Istanbul, they're willing to fight for their rights. They're willing to protest. They are a democracy, and they have democratic protests quite often, in fact. So whether or not we would see anything like that when we were there, I would think if the situation remains as it is, there are, I think, many people in Turkey who would like to see Turkey move in and deal with this problem. So it's hard to say at this stage. Nobody really knows where this conflict is going to go. But even today, there has been some protests in Ankara. I believe a number of people were killed. And obviously this is a hot issue in Turkey.
Right. So if any of the parents of students that might be on that show or on that trip are watching, can you look them in the eyes and say, your child is in good hands?
Yes, yes I can. I can assure you, not only will we not be anywhere near the fighting, but having traveled and lived in Turkey for over 20 years, I can tell you that it is a wonderful, peaceful country. And one of the interesting things about Turkey in the past, since their creation as a republic in 1923, is that they've been non-expansionist. With the exception of Cyprus in 1974, Turkey has very rarely, if ever, gone outside their own borders. And one of the reasons why they don't want to go into Syria is they've been very reticent to ever do that sort of thing. So Turkey is reserving itself from the conflict, and I think that that's a wise thing to do at this stage.
I'd like to offer to Dr. Trelevin the last little bit of this segment on politics. Can you give us some insight into factors beyond the ones we talked about, specifically religion and historical conflict, that have led to the upheaval that we're seeing currently in Iraq and Syria?
The way religion's played a role in this
other than religion.
Other than religion, yeah. Well, one is for decades, Syria, Iraq, and many countries in the region have really governed with a lid on change, a lid on transformation and development of their societies. The Assad family dictatorship in Syria, Saddam Hussein for many years, and before him others in Iraq. So one, at least I think one of the reasons there's so much turmoil is that there's been so little processing of ordinary, what other parts of the world would regard as ordinary adaptation to change, where to fit in traditional religion in a society that needs to deal with a large pool of young people without too many prospects socially or economically, how to cope with an international economic order that isn't too favorable to the non-oil producing countries or even the oil producing countries sometimes. Right. So you have, I mean, I think that's one key problem in much of that region of all this. Iran is dealing with this awkwardly too, and better than many. But this need to adapt to the change that pushes in on them just by being on this planet.
Do you think Western intervention solves more problems than it causes?
No, I think there's two sides to this. There's indigenous, local politics and conflicts of interest, and people there are agents and sometimes very badly intentioned, very bad sense of judgment. But I'm after, like I think lots of people, we should be very, very cautious to think that we in America or the NATO powers in Europe and Canada actually know how to fix this. It's maybe we can find some key that unlocks things, but I'm skeptical.
That leads us great into our final break. I want to give you all one last chance to tweet in your questions and your opinions. When we come back, we're going to talk about how you all think we as individuals and as a nation should move forward in terms of what we do here and what we do abroad with dealing with ISIS. So please tweet in your final questions and responses. We'll be right back.
This year, Gonzaga University is hosting the Opus Prize. I spoke with Angela Ruff about what this means to our community.
The Opus Prize Foundation is looking for an institution with a similar mindset, that it's important to do service and it's important to move humanity forward. And so I think that's a compliment to us. The most focused role I have is regarding hospitality. When are people arriving? How are they getting from point A to point B? Do we have any food concerns? You know, just like you would for any guest, right? That we want to be well prepared, and then helping other people get ready to welcome everybody who's coming.
This event provides a special opportunity for the GU and Spokane communities to come together to recognize the work of 3 outstanding individuals.
Tickets for the award ceremony are free, and we've given out about half of those to students, to staff and faculty, but also to the community members. And so, you know, about 1/3 of what we've distributed already is the community being interested in who's winning this prize. So I think it's an indicator that it's a welcome thing.
If you are interested, tickets are still available, so get involved.
Students can get their tickets at the Crosby Information Desk. They are assigned seating, so getting your ticket earlier means a better seat. So that might be a fun thing for people to know. We will be providing shuttle transportation down to the Fox and returning that night to make it easy for people to get there.
welcome back to GUTV's first episode of Think Tank. Now, we asked you to tweet in some of your concerns, thoughts, or questions about this ISIS conflict, and that you have done, so thank you very much. Now, one tweet that we received is from Luke Patron, and he says, Leon Panetta predicts that ISIS will take 30 years to defeat. Do you think this timetable is accurate? That's a really good question. Rob?
Jess. So this segment is going to be focused on how we as individuals in a nation should move forward in terms of, I think, how we think about ISIS and how we should respond, or not over-respond. Do you think it will take 30 years to combat ISIS, to get them back to a steady state?
I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, I think of the conflict in Northern Ireland that went on so long between the Republican forces and the British and Unionist forces, and in some ways still isn't quite done.
Taliban.
Yeah. So I think it would be so, and transformation of leadership and interests in the region would have to come along with this. If everyone thinks this is just a problem of suppressing ISIS, I think they're quite mistaken. There's a network of problems that have to be addressed, but principally by the local leadership, I think. But I think former Secretary of Defense Panetta is probably not far from the mark, depending on what you mean by defeat them. I mean,
right, and it's trying to catch smoke with your hands, I would assume.
Yeah, right.
Because where ISIS falls, I'm guessing another group like that could rise.
Well, right. I mean, this is relatively easy to create these things. As Andy said, Turkey has a very fine standing army, but it took years to build that. Lots of training, lots of equipment, etc. Integration with NATO. But this kind of thing, ISIS, it doesn't come out of just thin air, but it takes much less time to do the kind of damage ISIS has done.
I'd open this up to the rest of the panel. How do you feel? Do you feel comfortable with funding and arming opposition to ISIS or similar groups?
I think actually that President Obama made the right call last year when he stopped the idea of arming them, because we really didn't know who was over there. And that is the big problem. And Leon Panetta, who was also the head of the CIA, is well aware of what some of these problems are. And I think the idea of just throwing more guns at them isn't really going to help.
Right.
I think actually what they're trying to do now by forming this broad coalition of partners who are local, who realize that this is in their best interest to cooperate with each other, could in fact have very beneficial eventual outcomes in that greater cooperation between states and a recognition of what the problem is, could actually benefit the region in the long run.
Yeah. What I would think is that many of these states have had histories in the Cold War being client states of either the Soviet Union or the United States, of being the successors of British or French domination of the region, and elites that have tried to keep the lid on and keep their own sources and bases of power well off against the larger populations. So maybe nation building is not best done by us in the West, but nation building can be done by those coalitions of interests within countries who wish to build a nation. I mean, Taiwan and South Korea are very successful societies today, but not because somebody told them how to do it.
I'd like to finish the night with this question. I'd like to start with Dr. Goldman and then go to the rest of the panel. What mentalities and conclusions do you think we should guard ourselves from when we're looking at this conflict?
Well, I think if we're looking at this conflict, which is very much still unfolding, day by day right now, we need to be very, very careful in terms of making assumptions. ISIL, or the Islamic State, if we want to call it that, is a very, very different type of organization. They're reacting in ways which are highly unpredictable. And we have yet to really, I think, get a good grasp on this. I think we're going to have to move slowly and try not to make assumptions. For example, who to arm and so forth, until we get a better understanding. And I realize that people want us to jump in, and there are terrible things going on, no question about it. But on the other hand, we need to be very, very careful about how we proceed, or else we could strengthen their hand.
Do you think the social media that has come into play so much with ISIS has fed into an American hunger to intervene?
I think Americans who understand social justice recognize that this is a real tragedy unfolding here. I think a lot of people, once they began to realize what was going on, I'm not sure if social media had anything to do with it, but I certainly think media in general and a greater understanding of the events in that area through some excellent reporting which has been going on from this war-torn area, I think is making people realize that yes, we do need to be involved, and I think social media or not, I think it's a good thing that we are getting involved.
So, Dr. Dunn, what mentalities or conclusions do you want people to be guarded against?
Well, I'll just say what I generally would say to anybody ordinary. I guess that's the television audience, to really try and learn something about Islam, to learn something, especially as Americans, to become educated and not to fall into sort of ideological fantasies, right, about us and them, or about our cause being really just. I mean, after what happened in Iraq, and I think the loss of morale around those events for a lot of Americans, there's a lot of confusion. And so I would just say, learn something, get to know your Muslim neighbors, reach out. Muslims and non-Muslims should really, to the best of their ability, try and forge relationships of trust. And I know that's like, how are we going to do that? But I really think that people should put some effort into doing that, just as a way of, not only cooperating as citizens, but as a way of thinking, not just in terms of the United States against ISIS, but really how we can fix things as a global community.
Dr. Trelevin, mentalities or conclusions?
I would want to caution citizens and their elected leaders from optimism about trying to solve things quickly. I noticed David Cameron has said after every execution, beheading of a British subject, that the British government will make great efforts to go find the guilty parties and bring them to justice. I'm not sure, but I doubt that he has any sense how that's going to be accomplished. And I do too. I think expecting this thing to go away or be fixed quickly would be wrong. So I think patience and prudence will be very important. And a lot of ugly news will come forward for a long time yet. But that's not necessarily new for the region or the world.
And there's one more thing I would add, listening to Dr. Trelevin, and I think it's about being educated about our own military practices. What does our military do that's helpful? What practices should we be cautious about, right? So, as I said, these Muslim leaders hold al-Baghdadi to standards of just war theory. What are our standards of just war theory? Do drone strikes against terrorist targets make sense? Are they ethical? What about the collateral damage? It's these kinds of questions that I think as Americans we can be asking ourselves.
Yeah, definitely. I think so. I
think that is a great place to wrap up our discussion tonight. Thank you for watching The Think Tank. I'd like to thank my panelists, Dr. Trelevin, Dr. Dunn, Dr. Goldman, and I'd like to thank all of you for watching as well, for tweeting in, for posting your Facebook questions, and for participating in this important discussion. Make sure you tune in next Wednesday for our exclusive coverage of the Opus Prize and all the events that happen next week. From all of us here at GUTV, good night.